Hey everyone, we're just going to give it a minute here. Thank you for joining us today. I'm just going to wait until I see the numbers start to calm down, um, and then we'll get started. So just give us another minute for everybody to join on. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So hello everyone, and welcome to our 2022-2023 Better Buildings webinar series. This is dedicated to bringing the latest actionable insights from leading industry experts. This annual series is a chance to explore topics, technologies, and trends that affect your organization, as well as efforts to accelerate decarbonization and energy efficiency adoption. Okay, next slide. So today we're going to be focusing on tapping into the power of utility scale solar, and we're going to be looking at state and local perspectives. But before we dive in, as always, we've got a few housekeeping points to go over. And so just note, we are going to record today's session. That'll be archived on our Better Building Solutions Center. We're going to follow up with everybody registered just to make sure you have a copy with that. Next, everybody is in listen-only mode. I'm going to talk about how we're going to do Q&A in a minute, but your microphones are muted, so if you have any tech issues, just make sure you send a message in the Q&A box and our support staff will help you. That's located right at the bottom of your Zoom panel. Okay, all right, next slide. All right, so just to give you a little background on myself, my name is Shannon Zarin. I am with the U.S. Department of Energy. I am located in our Office of State and Community Energy Programs. This is a new office that was partially created to support the passage of a lot of the public sector provisions of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act, as well as expanding, some of our core capabilities, such as the weatherization program and the state energy program. My area of focus is state and local energy planning. And so you're going to hear from me a little bit at the front about if you are considering utility scale solar, maybe you've got sort of a smaller interim project in mind, 5 to 10 megawatts or greater than 10 megawatts. Maybe you're considering grid interconnectivity. We'll talk about how do you get started with that planning. And then you're going to hear from two folks at the state and local level who are going to talk about how did they actually get this done? What are some lessons learned that they took from this? Okay, I'm going to go into our agenda then, our actual formal agenda. Thank you. So I'll give you an introduction to some of our speaker, but first we'll get some polls in. I'd like to know a little bit about you guys. We're going to talk about our state and local planning for energy platform. And then we'll dive into the speaker presentations, and then we'll give an opportunity to turn it around for you guys to ask questions of any of our speakers. All right, next slide. All right, so let me talk about how we're going to do Q&A. For those of you guys who are familiar with our webinar structure, you've probably heard of Slido before. So all you're going to do is just go to www.slido.com. And then our event code today is #DOE. And so if you'd like to ask our panelists any questions, feel free to indicate that directly on those questions. But submit them at any time throughout the presentation. And towards the end of the presentation, I'll go through and make sure that we answer any questions that you may have. Okay, and if you like somebody else's question, again, one of the functionalities of the program is you can select the thumbs up icon and it will get moved closer up to the top so that I can see it when I first look at it. All right, so I'm going to give you a second to get over there as I transition to the next slide because we actually have some polls. We'd like to get to know you a little bit more. So go ahead over to the polls and go ahead and answer the first question. And we'll go ahead and put that up for you guys to see some of the results. So the first question is going to be, what sector best describes your organization? All right, great. We're getting a lot of good participation here. Seeing mostly local government so far, followed by state. Okay, good amount of energy service providers and consultants, NGOs, higher education. All right, this is a really great distribution to learn about both the tool as well as hear from our public sector partners as well. All right, I'm going to transition then to the next polling question since it's kind of slide down. All right, so have you guys considered utility scale solar investments? Yes, no, maybe you've already implemented it. And if that's the case, we'd certainly love to know more about that. And we look forward to the Q&A part so we can have more of a conversation about that. But it looks like, yeah, there's a significant number of folks here today on the call that have looked into utility scale solar investments. All right, perfect. Okay, let's take a look at the very last question. All right, so we're going to be introducing our state and local planning for energy platform. This can help with answering a lot of those initial planning questions you may have about utility scale solar. So if you guys are learning about SLOPE for the first time, it looks like a lot of you are, which is great. Maybe you've heard of it before but never used it. You've explored it a little, and maybe some of you guys have used it for your energy planning. But it looks like it is a new tool for a lot of you, so this will be good. Okay, so let us go ahead and move on then to the next slide. Thank you guys for participating in those polls. It's a good way for us to kind of get a sense of where you guys are and your familiarity with some of our resources. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce our panel of speakers. I have a little content I'm going to go into before we kick things off, but I want to introduce our first speaker, Katie Richardson. Katie Richardson is a group manager at NREL's Innovation and Entrepreneurship Center. She serves as the lead of the state and local planning for energy platform. She supports the growth of community partnerships and delivers technical assistance to cities pursuing a clean energy transition. She also holds a PhD in physics. Our second speaker is going to be Eric Schmidt. Eric Schmidt serves as the Director of Sustainability for the City of Chattanooga in the Department of City Planning. In his role, Eric has helped lead the development of Climate Action Plan, providing coordination with department administrators, operations staff, and the Office of Mayor Kelly to achieve greater adoption of sustainable business practices. And prior to working for the city, Eric served as a lead ecologist for the Chattanooga, Tennessee Office of Arcadis. Following working with the Georgia Department of Transportation, Office of Environmental Compliance in Atlanta, Georgia. And then we also have John Odell. He has over 25 years of experience in the energy and sustainability fields. He began working for the city in 2009 of Worcester. He is currently responsible for managing many of the city's green initiatives, including the city's large-scale 115 million energy savings performance contract with Honeywell. And he was recently awarded winning a Worcester Green Plan at the City of Worcester, Massachusetts. So I'm really excited to have all of them with us today. We'll get started with Katie, but first I want to give you guys a brief introduction on what SLOPE is, and then Katie's going to provide us with a demo for how you can start planning for utility scale solar. Okay, so let me then move us to the next slide. All right, so I'll talk really quickly just to give you a very high level overview of SLOPE before a demo. And so this is a free online platform. It's got great data visualizations, very easy to use. But the idea is if you're just kind of getting started with your strategic energy planning, you don't necessarily perhaps know what sectors are your biggest GHG emitters, your biggest energy consumers, which renewable technologies are your best assets for your geographic location, or perhaps what types of energy efficiency upgrades you can make to specific building types. This is a great tool that has a lot of those resources. So we've got basically two tools in one. The scenario planner allows you to look at different strategies. So if you were, for example, to say, let's say transportation was the sector that was consuming the greatest amount of energy and also had the greatest GHG emissions associated with it, you would be able to see how much electric vehicle infrastructure you would need on the road to meet your carbon goals by a certain date. And then how many electric cars need to be on the road, how much charging infrastructure associated with that. So you could get a lot of really great data if you explore that vehicle electrification decarbonization pathway. The data viewer also has a ton of great data on energy consumption, renewable energy potential, equity considerations. So if you're looking to set up these big infrastructure projects and you're trying to figure out, okay, what county in my state, what geographic area, is this going to have any, impacts on any disadvantaged communities? The data viewer is a very significant tool to help you answer some of those questions. Okay, so next slide. And so essentially, just from a very high level, if you're looking at kind of some of the things slope can help you look at, it's a very easy way. We aggregate a ton of data all in one place. You know your local conditions the best, and so it's going to give you a really good idea of kind of where you can move your strategic prioritization. And then with your knowledge of local conditions, you can really set your climate action plans in place. You can identify those high impact technologies, those challenging sectors that you need to prioritize investments and planning towards to help you really reduce emissions costs and consumption. And then we kind of give you these breadcrumbs, so how you can navigate additional DOE tools. So if you figure out, okay, I need this many vehicles on the road that are electrified by this date, I can then go to another tool that tells me how much charging infrastructure do we need. And so it gives you a lot of these nice breadcrumbs to go to what is my next step? What is my next step after this? And then we have a lot of community stories that we publish about how are they using slopes. You can learn from other jurisdictions as well. All right, next slide. Okay, and so this is just meant to show you kind of the wide breadth of data that is on slope. We are going to be focusing again on our solar data points, but just we've got everything from energy consumption, transportation data, energy and environmental justice data, renewable energy potential, cost of energy, commercial and residential building characteristics, demographics. So there's a lot of data that you can kind of layer on top of each other and look at. Down to all kinds of different levels of granularity to make decisions towards energy planning. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it over to Katie so she can give us a demo on some of those solar modules. And then later on in the presentation, we'll hear from folks who've actually been able to implement solar in their communities.
Fantastic. Hoping that you can see and hear me and see my screen. Thank you so much, Shannon, for introducing the State and Local Planning for Energy platform. There is a link in the chat, so I encourage people to pop that into your browser in the next few minutes and follow along. This is a great way for you to have some practice watching how slope can be used, especially when it comes to these questions around utility scale solar planning for your community. So I've started here on the home site. There's lots of information here about how to use slope. There's a great tutorial video and more that you can explore. And in fact, if you are curious about how other communities are using slope, we've got a couple of example stories that I encourage you to take a look at. But Shannon mentioned that there were sort of two components and capabilities of slope, and I'd love to start today with a scenario planner. Maybe you're a community that's thinking about how renewable energy generation can help support your energy system goals, but maybe you don't have a sense yet of how much energy your area or community is going to need in the future. So there's a really fantastic component here on the scenario planner. There's a control panel on the left-hand side, and I'm going to today use an example. NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, which is the nation's only national laboratory focused exclusively on renewable energy and energy efficiency, had the chance to work with a community, Frankfort, the city of Frankfort in Kentucky, and they have established a couple of different goals. So the first goal is to realize 100% renewable energy for the city operations, and then also for community-wide by 2030. So here I'm going to use the county that Frankfort, the city, sits in as my location example. So you can type in this box whatever community you're working with and sort of take a look at that county or city level for this for this consumption data. Now, the scenario planner has many more features than we'll explore today. I think I've got plenty to cover here, but I want to point out you can explore these charts by carbon emissions as well, and as well as system costs. And then for each of these examples, you can also explore different scenarios. So decarbonization of the grid becomes available if you're exploring things other than consumption, as well as energy efficiency, electrification, lots to explore. But for the purposes of today, let's just take a look together at the reference case for the county that the city of Frankfurt sits in. We can draw this slider across to the 2030 goal that the community has. And from this information, you can sort of see by sector on the electricity side, the amount of electricity that is needed to support the residential sector, the commercial sector, and the industrial sector in the community of Franklin County, Kentucky. And you could add these sort of pieces up. And in fact, that's done for you just for the electricity sector. So you can get a total MMBTU. So if you've got a 100% goal, this is a really great way to think about how much energy are we going to need to generate, and how might I work together with my utility to figure out the transformation into a green economy for that particular consumption. So that is the fastest scenario planner demonstration I think I've ever done. There's so much more to explore, but for the purposes of this webinar, I want to switch over now to the data viewer. So the data viewer has, as Shannon mentioned, I think 47 and growing data sets on renewable energy and energy efficiency. So under the energy generation tab, you'll find the utility PV data. And when you click on that, you can see that the map automatically populates at the state level. But if you click on this icon that's a folded map, you can get down to the county level and begin exploring at a new resolution, or you can type in the particular county that you're considering. So I'll use Franklin as our example in this case. And what you're seeing here on the left-hand side is a total of megawatt hours that if you were to totally paper every opportunity with utility scale solar, this is what would be the potential in the county for generation. And obviously this is a technical generation potential. I really want to emphasize it's an upper bound of the potential in the community. It doesn't necessarily consider all sorts of factors, the political will, some elements of land ownership are not considered, market conditions are not considered, but you can get a sense of the total potential for utility scale solar in this chart here on the right when you click on the county. In particular, I want to point out for this chart, in addition to my caveat about technical generation potential and what it means, this is a logarithmic scale. So you can see far and away, utility scale solar is a strong potential in this community. You can also see distributed wind potential, residential PV potential. So this is if you were to consider the rooftops in the community on residential homes, and then you can see the same thing for commercial. And what's really great is if you want to do some offline calculations, you can figure out what percentage of the residential demand that we saw in step 1 for your particular community might be met by residential rooftop solar. And when you compare those two numbers, often we find that the demand for electricity in the community from that sector cannot be fully met by rooftop solar alone. And that's a fantastic argument for why some communities are looking to utility scale solar, larger megawatt installations, whether that be a few megawatts at the community scale or partnering with the utility to install a larger array. That's why those resources can be so important. So really encourage you to do those calculations, comparing sort of that first chart to that second chart for your community. Now, I do want to point out, if you do have any questions about where the data comes from, there's always information at the top of the page here for the data viewer that you can explore. And then you can also download the data. So this is a nice resource if you do want to do some of that extra analysis. There are a couple other things that I want to point out quickly here. If you scroll down to the cost of energy section, there is a levelized cost of energy data set. This is actually our single most downloaded and most viewed data set on the entire website. So here you can see that for the vast majority of the nation, in fact, if we zoom out, the lowest cost energy source is hydropower. Of course, it's very difficult to build new hydropower. You can also sort of move this time slider at the top and the map will repopulate with new information on the left. But on the right-hand side, you can see the cost per megawatt hour. So you can, again, combine this information with the previous chart to think about what is going to be the cost to meet our energy demand. In the case of Frankfort, Kentucky, their first goal was meeting city operations. And so they're thinking about a smaller array, at least 8 megawatts to think about how they can meet their goals. But you can see utility scale solar here costs in the yellow. If this chart's a little bit dense for you, what you can do is you can start turning off technologies that maybe, for whatever reason aren't appropriate for your community. And so perhaps, for example, you want to just compare rooftop solar with residential wind and utility scale solar. And you can see here that these technologies come together in cost, but right now it's certainly the case, and for the next decade or more, you can really realize the most savings with this utility scale solar cost. So really great chart for communicating with your stakeholders, with your decision makers. I encourage you to take screenshots of slope and drop them into your presentations. 2 more layers that I want to just share really quickly. I think everyone is concerned about energy and environmental justice, certainly an area of focus when you think about the different aspects of the, you know what, I'm going to just switch to the tab where I have this brought up already. Oh, there we go. And we do have data around, so some of the incoming federal funding is focused on the energy justice component, certainly an area of many grants that you want to bolster, and SLOPE is a great place to find some of this information. I really want to emphasize that this data is not only on the county level, we also have it at the census tract level, which is so important when you begin thinking about the specifics around working with a community. And I'm zooming in sort of very roughly in Kentucky here, but you can see in urban areas and in rural areas alike, there's a broad range, depending on which census tract or community or neighborhood you're thinking about, of burdens that are experienced by low-income families and other families alike, in terms of how much of their income they are spending on energy bills or transportation bills. So some of these communities you can see around Frankfort are having larger, energy burdens and larger transportation burdens, and others are in the low category. And so this is a great way to begin thinking through where are the benefits of the new energy system going to be felt, and where are the burdens of the current energy system felt, and how can we use this energy transition to make sure that everyone can benefit. So speaking of benefits, lots of other energy justice factors to explore, and I encourage you to look at those. One final one I'll highlight, and then I'll hand the mic back, is the clean energy job estimate. So these are brand new. I do want to emphasize that they are at the state level. So here we have Kentucky, and you can take a look at the way that these jobs are going to be changing from 2020 to 2030. We have actuals for 2020 in each of these sectors, and then they increase over time. So this is, again, a great chart to be sharing with your stakeholders and thinking about what the impacts are in investing in solar PV, and of course, how we can capture those jobs locally to your economy. So certainly recommend taking a look at this. We find in many communities a doubling of the opportunity in solar jobs over the next decade. In some of these other sectors, you can see even more increases. In the case of working with Frankfort, there was a lot of conversation around the energy efficiency piece as well, based on this chart. So highly encourage you to explore all of these layers at SLOPE. If you do have any questions, there's a nice feedback button right here where you can give us some feedback, or you can email us at slope@nrel.gov.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Katie. And yeah, I see some questions coming in. We'll get to those in the end, but we do have a lot of resources that can help answer where the data is coming from and what level of granularity each data set is, whether it goes to the state, county, census, or city level. But now I'd like to turn it over to some folks who've actually, moved the needle forward on utility scale solar. And so we're going to have our first partner speaker, Eric Schmidt, go ahead and take it away from the city of Chattanooga.
All right, great. Thanks, Shannon. And that was a fantastic presentation by Katie and Dr. Richardson. And I'll be needing to update my one of my slides to include slope evaluation in our process. Eric Schmidt, Director of Sustainability for the City of Chattanooga, within our planning department here, which is intended to look at everything from large-scale regional planning and local capital planning and helping to direct strategies towards our operations. Next slide, please. I just wanted to speak to our background and sort of how we got to the point where we can consider utility scale solar in terms of our strategies for achieving the needs of the city, and would be remiss to not note that we joined the Better Buildings Challenge in 2016, and it's been a great platform for us to measure and monitor our progress and have access to technical resource and elevate the work and really put some emphasis behind it. So we did set a standard 20% EUI goal and achieved that a few years later. We had some good progress in the works and are currently sitting at 36%, and that's translated to a total of about $2.2 million in annual savings. So for us as a relatively medium-sized city of 200,000, that's a good number for us. And moving forward, we're going to transition from the Better Buildings to the Better Climate Challenge that closely aligns with our forthcoming climate action plan, which will have a net zero carbon goal by 2040. Next slide. Also, just sort of in keeping with that, wanted to note that part of where we got again to this point in considering and actually executing distributed renewable projects is sort of right sizing our house to begin with. So with our facilities management team and building automation systems, LED lighting retrofits, and an array of other projects, we were able to significantly bring down our initial energy use to where we can start scoping projects that make sense, making sure we take advantage of those lower cost options before we got started. So you can see the reason I have 3 years here is just to show you from the full first year of our utility scale solar, we had made significant progress, but then from 2020 to 2021, really saw another big drop following that. Next slide. So this was our first project. So we suppose we figured we're going to jump into this, let's go big. So for us at the Moccasin Bend Environmental Campus, which is a 5 or 6 county regional wastewater treatment facility, and we consider it an environmental campus because we capture biosolids and land apply those, and we're looking at strategies to enhance those biosolids and the gas we capture and reuse at the plant. So it's thinking more as a full suite, and of course the water quality function, which is critical to the Tennessee River that flows almost 700 miles through Tennessee. So again, over 400,000 residents and growing. We're expected to hit 500,000 within the next few years. But the wastewater plant uses over half of the municipal government's energy use, and so it was a prime spot to install a solar array. And instead of looking at any of the buyback plans, we decided it would make sense to utilize all that power at the plant, so every bit of it is behind the meter, and has resulted in our savings of over $400,000 on the first full calendar year, which is significant and gives us a decent ROI before becoming cash positive with an expected long life cycle with the project. Obviously, again, for the sake of for water quality, both for our residents and good use of taxpayer dollars, our downstream residents in Tennessee need to know that they've got good neighbors upstream. So, just a couple of items with this. It's not mentioned on here, but this was paid in full with the enterprise funds of the storm sewer of the wastewater treatment plant. So it is paid for in full already, and is just giving those returns already. And during the project scoping, panel efficiency with the maturation of the market increased 23%. So we ended up with over 4 megawatts of generation versus the 3.25 we were anticipating. Land, as you can see in the background of the photo, is a consideration in Tennessee. So I really look forward to getting on the slope and seeing what works for us. We want to preserve and protect as much tree canopy cover that we have. So we have to be creative in looking for available land, and this happened to be a good spot for that. Obviously, good economy of scale with this project as compared to the next project you'll see, but that both focused on resilience. And so hopefully in the future, we will become more sophisticated in thinking about our seed planting schemes and grazing in lieu of mowing maintenance. I think those are on the table, but as of now, it's a pretty standard stabilization project. Next slide. This is apologize for the clarity here, but just some numbers to back up what was on the previous slide. Over $400,000 in annual savings and producing over 5 million kilowatt hours per year. This is a December, but hitting a pretty high efficiency rating. It does have about a 100-foot shade buffer around it to help achieve that. Next slide. So building off of the previous project and holistic assessment of viable projects, the police headquarters, which is referred to as the Police Services Center in Chattanooga, needed a new roof. And it is adjacent to the county 911 call center, which is managed by the county and has its own redundancy and backup. We had an undersized, fairly old but operational backup generator, but really only satisfied basic needs for the building. So we knew that we needed to increase that, and obviously with an increasing frequency and storms while we were scoping this project, we had a F4 tornado come through the eastern half of Chattanooga. Luckily missed this area, but emergency response was just ever more critical at that time, and it reinforced what we were looking at here. So with the local municipal utility called EPB, or the Electric Power Board, we partnered together to come up with a project that included rooftop solar, battery storage, a new generator, and a microgrid controller to give 24/7, 365 operational continuity with various considerations for shading and things like that. But all of that suite of generation provides that, and currently provides a 25 to 30% reduction in retail power purchase, but also giving peak shaving and power distribution advantages to our distributor EPB. And also just enhanced internal core competencies in developing the project, working together as a team, has raised the bar for us, and looking forward to replicating this where we can in other areas of the city. Next slide. Again, for clarity, good performance. Green line is the new energy retail energy purchase as opposed to the historical averages in the red. So you can see it's following the annual purchase, but it is a 25% calculated reduction, and we're expecting to see more 25 to 30% based on EPB's forecast moving forward. Go next slide, please. And to really make it utility scale, we are under some of the metric standards for 5 megawatts or more right now, but we are, with the climate action plan and our carbon neutral goal, going to need to look at scaling up. So this year we'll be performing a greenhouse gas inventory and carbon drawdown analysis, and looking at portfolio-wide energy efficiency and host site suitability. So really taking that slope tool consideration into hand, looking at our funding opportunities from capital to third-party financing and federal funding opportunities coming down through the bipartisan infrastructure law and Inflation Reduction Act. We're excited about those. We're excited to leverage our experience and the skin in the game that we have, and working with our local partners at EPB as well as TVA to look for those solutions. And then after that, measure, manage, report, and repeat. And that should do it. My contact info is on the next slide. And thank you for the opportunity to share this.
Thank you so much, Eric. Okay, just to remind you, make sure you are putting your questions into the Slido poll for all of our speakers. If you have a particular question for a specific speaker, go ahead and indicate who you'd like me to ask at the end. But now we're going to hear from our final speaker, John. Go ahead and take it away.
All right, well, thank you so much. As Shannon just indicated, my name is John Odell. I'm the Chief Sustainability and Resilience Officer for the City of Worcester, Mass. Next slide. Want to start off by just sort of giving, we've done a bunch of solar projects throughout the city. That is a list of all the ones that we've done or are in process right now, except the landfill solar array. But that just gives you a sort of a snapshot of that. If you go to the next slide, you can now see the impact of what one utility scale solar project can do compared to what we traditionally do on rooftop or parking canopy arrays. So it really has an outsized impact on your total portfolio there. So just another indication there for folks, if you're going to go big and you get an opportunity to go big, this is something to certainly consider because of the not just the value, but the impact it has overall. Next slide. So our utility scale solar project was done. We put it on top of our landfill, which closed a few years ago. Actually, quite a few years ago, like 30, as I was thinking in my head. And so those are the projected numbers that we would get when we were putting this together as to what the value would be for this. The total offsets, when I talk about offsets, I'm talking strictly of the dollars that we would get from some of the incentive programs that were available at the time. This went online at the beginning of 2017. And so the market has changed since then. Some of the incentives that were available then aren't now, but of course the price of solar has come down. And of course, now with the Inflation Reduction Act, as I'm sure many of you are aware, there's some real financial benefits, tax incentive benefits that now municipalities can take advantage of. So if you are in local government and looking at this, these numbers that you have here may not match up exactly with what you might be considering, but they're probably not too far off. So ours is, if you go to the next slide. So ours is an 8.1 megawatt array. That's what it looks like on top of the landfill. We had 26 acres at the top that we could use. We had to work for quite some time with the folks at our local Department of Environmental Protection, the state agency, so that we could have access to that space. Because though we own the landfill, the state oversees the management of the landfill. In conjunction with us, make sure we're doing what we need to do. And it was restricted for a grasshopper sparrow and for which is a threatened species here. And so working with them, we really got to go into a deep dive and getting to appreciate all the players that can be involved with putting in a utility size solar like this. But I think it ended up being a really good project. So next slide. And so what are the financials? I'll give you a quick snapshot there. So our total cost, when all is said and done, which includes not just the array, but all the ancillary work that had to be done to put that array up, came out to about $27 million. But the good news is the projected revenue over the 30-year lifespan, and we're trying to be conservative with that. This may last longer than that, we hope so. But in 30 years, we're expected to make between the RECs, solar RECs, which are specific to Massachusetts back when this was being put into place, and net metering credits, which are also a specific Massachusetts incentive program for solar. Between all those, we're expecting to generate about $67 million worth of benefit for the city, which means, of course, that our projected revenue less those costs are about $40 million to the good. So that makes it really quite a lucrative project for us. Most municipalities back then were simply leasing the space so that other developers could use it. Primarily because municipalities until just now weren't eligible for that tax credit, and most municipalities just didn't think the math would work. But we took a hard look at the math, and given our unique situation there in Massachusetts at the time, it really clearly was very cost effective. Next slide. So when you consider doing something like this, of course, the reason you do it is for a variety of reasons, to meet your, in our case, our Worcester Green Plan goals, and included in those goals, of course, are emission reductions, reducing our costs, reducing electricity usage where we can. And so you can see here to date what we've generated. This is a little actually conservative because the array went online a little bit before this, but the monitoring began in early 2017 and monitoring began in May. But this does capture pretty much everything that we've done to date. As you may have noticed, those with keen eyes may have noticed that the 43 million kilowatt hour number is a little bit lower than the projected number that was on the previous slide. And I'll walk you through why that was in a moment. So if you go to the next slide. We can talk about lessons learned. So this is really the bulk of what I wanted to talk about today, is to focus on this. The lessons learned are pretty significant in my mind, that you got to go in with your eyes wide open. Maybe the most important thing is to always recognize that if for most folks here, this is the first time you'll do one of these kinds of projects. The folks you'll be dealing with, whether it's the developer who's going to help you install this, and or utilities or anyone else that goes and gets, they've done a lot of these. This is your first one, so it's really important that you plan things as best you can for your design, for your contracting, funding, etc. So to that, on the design, we made a mistake. We actually didn't have as much surge protection as we probably should have had initially. And so I would recommend, of course, you have surge protection, not just for the inverters that you'll have there, but the combiner boxes too, which was important. We got hit by a lightning, and which is, I'm sure, more common in other parts of the country than here in Worcester. But remember, you're going to be out in most of these are out in wide open spaces, and lightning can often is attracted to those areas, as you might know. So including lightning arresters, even though it is an additional expense, is actually well worth those costs. We ended up losing several $100,000 worth of revenue because the lightning hit in the spring and we couldn't get it fixed until August. So we lost one of our peak months, several peak months in 2018 because of that. So in the contract stage, you want to make sure you hire a third-party expert in solar design and installation and maintenance to make sure that your contract terms and scope are as thorough as you can make it. And no one wants change orders and extra costs, of course, but even more important, you want to get it right. And like I said, if this is your first time doing something of this size, there's some nuances there that you might not be aware of, and I would really recommend you hire a third-party expert to assist. In terms of funding, one of the things that we learned as this project was underway is that it was really important that the savings, the attributes that we get from this, those for the SRECs and for the net metering credits that we got would be put into a fund that would not only provide funding for ongoing maintenance, but for other mitigation projects that we want to do throughout the city, which has a really positive ripple effect. So that's been a real plus for us. Next slide. Obviously, with construction, you make sure you're working with a reputable and experienced contractor. Make sure your wire conduits are all properly sealed. We had some issues with some mice, landfills, and big open spaces. There's lots of little critters that live there, and combiner boxes are warm, and they are great places for folks, little critters, to get into. So we want to be very careful about that. Make sure that on your maintenance efforts too, that those seals are checked, because that's an easy thing to, they can degrade over time, and then 3 years later, 4 years later, you have problems. Landscaping, consider pollinator friendly plant seeds as opposed to just your regular grass. There are two big reasons for that. Obviously, using pollinators there allows for species diversity. You can create a leg on a pollinator corridor. It can reduce maintenance over time, which is great because you can select pollinator plants that don't grow more than about 2 feet or so, which keeps them below the arrays themselves. It's also really good because they can grow pretty dense. You can have a dense pack of these pollinator plants, and some regular grasses have it's more challenging for the grass to be uniform across if you're not, adding a whole bunch of nitrogen to the soil, which we wouldn't want to do. And in that case, the benefits is you don't inadvertently, as you're doing the lawn mowing for the space, kick up rocks and stuff into your solar array, which did happen in our case. And I would recommend that you take some low-cost options to prevent that. And then, of course, making sure your staff is clearly assigned. Everyone knows their responsibilities and the training for maintaining and keeping a watch over of the solar array, all the benefits, all the make sure that the maintenance is done right, make sure that the contractors are doing what they're supposed to be doing. That's all really important too. Next slide. And then I think this is the last one I have, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about policy for municipal procurement. I'm going to pretend that there's a lot of local government folks nodding their heads about the complexities and challenges of municipal procurement. And I wanted to emphasize that even though we had to work with a lot of people up front that we didn't expect to in the state in particular, it ended up being a great lesson, because we also then reached out to people in our Department of Energy resources for the state, and people who work with procurement both internally for the city as well as on the state level, so that we could have a really good understanding of what options we have. And to that, it really did save us a lot of effort down the road, because there were some exceptions to the some of the procurement regs, Chapter 25A in Massachusetts in particular, that allowed us some avenues to explore that we wouldn't have known about otherwise. So that was really important just to really understand the landscape of what your options are for procurement. And I would recommend that to check what nuances may exist in your state as well, for your city. And then preventive maintenance and repairs. Again, I can't emphasize that enough. If you're going to own this, you're going to need to maintain it. And those solar arrays, by and large, are pretty low maintenance. When something does go wrong, it can be very costly. So making sure that maintenance is done in a responsible way and a consistent way is really important. So that was mine, kind of a different slant than the previous one. And I think hopefully between what Eric provided and what I'm mentioning here, you can get a good framework for anything that you guys want to do on your end. And of course, with the slope tool, that can be super useful, bridging this all together. So anyway, I think that's it for me. Next slide. Well, that worked out. It was the last slide. If you want more information about what we did, it's right here on the website here. And with that, I'll pass the torch. Thank you very much.
All right, perfect, John. Thank you so much. All right, so I think what we're going to do, and we do have additional resources that we'll make sure we send out, including any I talk about, through the Q&A. So you guys will all get a copy of the slide deck and the recording, and any additional resources that we have cited throughout the webinar will be included in that. Okay, so I'm going to try to summarize, the kind of series of questions that we've gotten for each presenter. So I'll start with Katie. So Katie, there's been a lot of questions about kind of the data sources and the scope of the data on slope. Can you just remind folks, I think there are 3 points. Number one, kind of what is the, the granularity of the data? There's diversity between, data at the state, county, city level, where folks can find where this data comes from. Again, if you can just remind people where that comes from. And then the last piece is, if you can talk about, how we kind of work collectively and collaboratively with state and local governments, and what's the best way to communicate with us and talk to us about data layers that may be of use to their energy planning.
Sure. So I'll try to answer all of those questions. I'm going to just pop and please, Shannon, if I've missed one, let me know. But, I just want to pop over to sharing my screen to point out, when we were showing the layer database and all of these different data sources, I think I've never done a webinar where we don't get the question, where's your data from? What's included and what's not included, right? And so any sort of, data source that you might be looking at, I just want to emphasize that here at the top of the page, there's plenty of information available for each layer about where it's coming from. In this case, the utility scale solar information is really based on that annual technology baseline. So some of these are more detailed than others. I want to go over to the clean energy jobs estimate. There's lots of information here about how to interpret this data, the methodology that was used. You can link into the full report, and there are some additional links and resources that you can explore. So this is a really great way. If you've got questions about what's included in the data, what's not included in the data, highly recommend you take a look at that top section of the layer database. Similarly, for the scenario planner, there's a link to the methodology report at the very bottom. So I was trying to answer some of those questions over at Slido about what was included and what isn't. So feel free to reach out if you have deeper questions. You can use that feedback tab or email at slope@nrel.gov. I also want to point out that not every data layer do we have depth in jurisdiction. So we provide every time that level of detail that is available in the analysis. So if the analysis goes down to the city level, we will have city level data for you. If the analysis includes Puerto Rico, we will have Puerto Rico and Alaska and Hawaii data for you. But not all analyses that we are displaying on Slope go to that level of detail. I do want to point out that energy consumption data that I shared earlier does go down not just to the county level, but to the city level. So that's something that if you are a city, you can explore the energy consumption information using the data viewer as opposed to the scenario planner, which only goes down to the county level. So that's a nice resource for you if you're a city. Obviously there's a lot of planning happens at the municipal level. And so, where we can, we're sharing that city level information. I think I've missed at least one question of yours, Shannon. What did I forget?
The last one was just how they can engage with us in the future if they want to talk about new data layers or, kind of how they go through this.
Absolutely. Yeah. So certainly there's a wide variety of ways that you can engage with NREL and with the DOE in order to explore Slope further. We certainly have plenty of opportunities to connect with us through webinars and through the email that I mentioned. I will say NREL provides technical assistance to communities. And so if you are interested in what that might look like, the particular capabilities of the National Laboratory, happy to start those conversations with you. Often, we can support communities, not just through Slope, but through a wide variety of tools and resources that DOE has funded to support to help local governments like you. through your planning. I'd also point out, of course, and maybe Shannon can speak to this more, but DOE has so many funding opportunities that are coming down the pipeline that I think we should all be tuned into. And it is our hope that these resources, including SLOPE, can help support your applications to those funding opportunities. So be doing some of your thinking in advance. Grab those, create your slide decks in advance. Think about what images you would want to include in a proposal or what data points you'd like to include, and cite SLOPE. There's a citation example right here at the bottom.
Perfect. Thank you, Katie. And yeah, for the federal funding, any federal grant that is asking you, pointedly for cost benefit analysis or any kind of, specific energy planning, SLOPE can absolutely help you provide that data that you need to kind of strategically prioritize. I'm going to go now to Eric. Okay, so we've had a couple of questions. One of them was, any challenges when you were looking to implement the solar array and kind of selling that to the local government? And then there were questions around how does the microgrid converter work? And then do you own the renewable energy certificates, or is that owned by the developer? So those are the three questions that we've gotten. I can repeat them back to you as we go.
Yes, and I may have to get back on a couple of them. I'm sorry, can you just, city, don't know, it sounds silly that I don't know. I don't know if we monetize the RECs for the Moccasin Bend. I can check in with that to see. Jacobs Engineering is our contracted engineer. We are under a consent decree with our wastewater treatment facility, so adds another layer of impetus. But and then we subbed out from them for some of the work, so I can check on that. Yeah, it did not have a bearing on the economics, though, from my understanding. I hope that helps, but I'll try to get a little bit more clarity.
Yeah. And then how is the microgrid converter work or controller worked?
So that is definitely managed as an asset of the Electric Power Board. I won't begin to tell you or guess how it works, but it is well mapped out, and it has multiple layers of redundancy, and it is. Trying to speak to some of the specificity of it, but it is used as a balance powering tool on a day-to-day basis. And basically, if we end up in an outage scenario, the campus is the kind of the first priority and going into an island mode. But it can achieve an island mode, and I can probably provide some context if the person with a question would like to dig into that.
Perfect. And then, yeah, with our time, I want to make sure we get one for John as well. And so they're also interested in seeing how long you're planning on selling the RECs. Are you going to do that in perpetuity or a limited period of time? And then I think there was one more I wanted to ask. Oh, about the projections. Give me a second to find those. The average longevity of the systems. And so they were wondering about how you calculated the longevity of the systems. Are there any diminishing performance factors being considered in your 20 to 30 year benefit projections?
Yes, so the selling of the SRECs, and after that's a 10-year window, incidentally, in Massachusetts. I think we're in year 5 right now with this array. We're going to be selling those for the full 10 years for the SRECs, and then the expectation is to continue to sell the RECs for the life of the solar array. So that's the answer to the first one. And then I think the second question you asked was the diminishing returns. And yes, that was factored in. So we assumed a 2% reduction the first year and then a 0.7% reduction each year thereafter. So hopefully that answers that question too.
Thank you, guys. Well, we're getting to the top of the hour, and I know I would love to keep going with this conversation. So let me talk about how you can keep this conversation going. Let me talk about some ways to continue to connect with us. But first, I just want to thank our amazing panel and all of the content they shared today. I'm going to move us then back to the presentation in the next slide so we can talk about the upcoming series. And so we hope you'll join us on Tuesday, that's February 7th, for our next webinar, which is titled ABCs of Multifamily Electrification Strategies. And so we'll talk about electrification strategies for multifamily buildings of various ages, in different climate zones and different sizes. Okay, next slide. And I want to make sure, oh, this is just another. So register today, that registration is open. We look forward to seeing you at that one. And then in the next slide, I want to make sure that you guys are all aware that the summit registration is open. We're pleased to announce our 2023 Better Building Summit, Better Plant Summit is open. It's being held in Washington, D.C., April 11th through the 13th. And the agenda is now live, so you can explore the different tracks and the different sessions. Very last slide, I just want to, thank our panelists. If you want to reach out to them, with additional questions to follow up, you've got the contact information there. I encourage you guys to follow us on Better Buildings Initiative on LinkedIn, our social media handles. And then again, I'm going to remind you, you guys will all receive an email with a recording of this session as well as the slide deck. And I want to thank you guys for attending and participating with us. And I hope that we get to continue to work with some of you in the audience. We definitely would love to hear some feedback on SLOPE. And if you have particular questions for the speakers, if you're considering utility scale solar and they can help walk you through some of those things, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you guys so much and have a great day.